Cool. We just started with a kind of fail. Good evening to the YouTube audience. This is Frontend RheinMain. Normally there would have been a sound logo playing. Some issue on my machine, it seems. The file was not found. But it was just a sound logo. So welcome to you all. I'm super excited this evening. We have a different format this time, and then super interesting a big topic. And I just, before we introduce ourselves a bit and what it's going about, right? I want to emphasize that this is going to be pretty much an interactive session with you in the audience, in the chat. So just right from the start, just post anything which is on your mind around accessibility. Maybe you are also a developer, like most of us, or have some opinions on what Leonie and Hidde are going to talk about, right? So feel free to go creative in the chat. We'll pick questions later after two lightning talks from Hidde and Leonie. Maybe let me quickly introduce myself and then we do a round of introduction. I'm Jan. I'm a white female in Germany, and I use the pronoun he and him. I have glasses and I'm wearing currently a t-shirt which says basically the motive of this t-shirt is not available in your country, which a bit maybe reflects some experiences when you maybe cannot access some content on the web as well and you are disappointed. Thanks again, Leonie. Thanks again, Hidde, that you were able to join so spontaneously. We just arranged all the things, I think, a few days ago, finally. And really looking forward to a super cool, interesting evening. And to ignite the discussion, we will start with the lightning talks. But maybe we first introduce ourselves. Leonie, maybe you might start. You are muted, Leonie, sorry. Yes.
There we go. Let's try that again. Hello, I'm Leonie Watson. I'm based in the UK. My pronouns are she, her. I have bright purple pink hair and I mostly wear black, no glasses though, because I'm registered blind, so I can't see anything or any of you lovely people out there. And I'm looking forward to talking more about accessibility and some, things that are interesting to me at the moment.
Cool. Hidde, how about you?
Hello, I'm Hidde. I am based in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. I'm wearing a red shirt and I'm holding a Sports Direct mug, huge one with tea, because we've been talking all day. And I'm very excited to talk to you all today and have a fireside chat about accessibility.
Cool, welcome. Moritz.
Hi, I'm Moritz. I'm from Karlsruhe, Germany, and I'm a white male in my late 30s. I'm wearing a baseball cap and a bottle of Club Mate.
Sure. Sure. Maybe just one sentence from me before we start. I'm kind of following you, Hidde, Leonie, quite a while already. I've seen both of you in some conferences. I think Frontiers in Amsterdam, Buy on Tellerrand. I'm also enjoying the conferences quite a lot. And I always perceive you both as of course, thought leaders, as you have both been or are, in your case, Leonie, engaged at the W3C, and you, Hidde, working also there, working for Mozilla and the Dutch government. So I always perceived you as one of those many great thought leaders who help, especially us developers, and of course others, non-technical stakeholders, for example, a lot to to get along, to come around with good solutions. And yeah, that's why I'm so excited that you kind of also joined today this small community here around Frankfurt in Germany. Yeah, so maybe to shout out to the audience, maybe you can also, if you like, introduce yourself. Where are you from? Where you're tuning in from? We are super curious to hear. I think enough said from me. Maybe Leonie, you go ahead with you also prepared a lightning talk. Let's see how this works out. We found out just before we started the stream that there might be some audio issues. Let's see where it goes. We try our best.
So, yes, up until a few minutes ago, I had a carefully planned presentation with some beautiful slides to share with you and lots of audio demos. Unfortunately, technical issues with the platform mean that although I can hear my demos, unfortunately, nobody else can, which sort of defeats the point. So forgive me, but you'll have to just bear with me while I talk to you about CSS Speech, possibly the most amazing CSS thing you have never heard about. It's actually been around for about 20 years, but it's not implemented in anything. I don't want to get your hopes up, but I am on a mission to get that changed. So what is CSS Speech? Well, it's a set of properties that will let you design the voice experience of your content in the same way that the CSS you all know and use already lets you design the visual properties of your content. So like you can choose a font family. With CSS Speech, you could choose a voice family. Like you can change colors, foreground or background. With CSS Speech, you could change, say, the volume. Like you can change the size of text with CSS. You can change the speaking rate or the pitch of voices. Very familiar properties, but just a different interface that you can design, or could if it was supported. But before I get much further into that, I want to think about why I think we need CSS Speech in the browser. And to do that, I want to think a bit about why we design things at all. Now, think of something really ordinary, like a chair. We all use them. Humans have been using chairs of one sort or another for a very, very long time, but we're still designing them. You can go back to the 1950s, and a physical designer called Erin Saarinen designed a chair called the Tulip. If you look it up online, you'll find pictures of it. And it was the first chair to be built out of a single piece of material, a single piece of plastic. He also wasn't a fan of chairs having 4 legs, so he did away with that design idea altogether and came up with this chair that's kind of on a pedestal, and it looks like a tulip. But it was designed as innovation. He threw away the rules and came up with something visually amazing, probably not terribly comfortable, to be honest with you, but he really innovated on a common idea like a chair. We designed for recognition. So sticking with the chair theme, think of a really grand throne that a king or queen might sit on. And the design there is just for recognition. It doesn't matter who is sitting in that throne or that chair, you know instantly that they must be someone important. They must be royalty or somebody, you know, you should be paying attention to. What that person looks like doesn't really matter at all. It's the chair and the design and all the, you know, jewels and gold and stuff that probably goes with it. So design helps you recognize things, sometimes real things, sometimes not so real things, but the recognition is important. And then there is experience. Another designer, Arne Jacobsen, designed a chair called the Egg. And you might have seen pictures of these because it really is very, very famous. And if you think about a chair, it's usually quite an open thing. We sit in chairs to sit at the table and eat. We use chairs to sit around in a living room and talk with our friends or sit by the fire, as we may well be doing now. We're probably all sitting in chairs now, and they're quite open things. But the Egg took a different approach. It's shaped like an egg, and so you sit inside it and you're cocooned and protected from what's around you. So it changed the whole experience of what sitting in a chair was like. So design, even of most ordinary things, has innovation, recognition, and experience behind it. So if we think about that on the web, the same things are true. We think of innovation. If you find pictures of the very first website, and they are out there, shown actually on Tim Berners-Lee's original NEXT computer, first website is the most amazing thing ever, but it's nothing much to look at. It's really boring. It's really bland. And so we started to innovate. First, we came up with HTML elements to let us change the font characteristics. We could even make things blink or center them if we wanted to. But then, of course, along came CSS, and now we can do all of that and much more with CSS properties. So we innovated. The web is an innovation. CSS was an innovation that let us move design forward. And then we used recognition. If you think about all the websites that you use every day, you probably don't even have to look at the words on a lot of them to recognize who they belong to. People use logos, they use colors. If I asked you to think of a chocolate bar and the color purple, the chances are you'll think of the brand Cadbury's. If I ask you to think of the color red and a soft drink, I bet you're thinking about Coca-Cola. And that's real design for recognition. In very, very little things like colors, you can instantly recognize and think of a particular brand. And then we come to experience. Design on the web actually has a lot to do with experience. The ease of something, how easy it is to use. We know that something is a button and we can click or tap or press on it because it's been designed to look like a button. So experience is very much, a key part of design, or should I say, design on the web is very much a key part of experience. So if we think about this now in terms of voices and voice interfaces, why do we choose voices at all? Well, for the same reasons. We can innovate. Think of Alexa, Siri, Cortana. They've all come along in recent years, and we can instantly recognize them by the way their voices sound. So huge innovations, but really usable voices. And each of them has their own characteristics that make them, and to come to my next point, really recognizable. And so that's important because we identify with voices. Like brand colors, we recognize people through their voices. If you've heard me speak before and you're listening now, you'll recognize my voice. The same with Jan, with Hidde, with Moritz, any of us, if you've heard us speak before, you'll recognize our voices. Same with your friends and your family. So it's a way to connect with people, make people feel like what they're hearing is something maybe they can trust, or perhaps conversely, something they shouldn't trust. And then it's part of experience. Think about all those movie trailers that you've watched where that really deep voice guy is like, in a world where, and it's instantly given you an experience. The trailer of the movie you're going to watch is probably an action movie. It's probably got someone like Will Smith or Jason Statham in it, and you know what you're going to get, but you're already feeling part of that experience just because of the voice that gets used in those trailers. So the answer to the question, really, why do we need CSS speech? It's because we should have all that in the browser, and we just haven't got it. And I really think that's a big gap in the scheme of things. I want us to be able to innovate. Almost every browser now, except Chrome, and of course you can use an extension there, has a web reader. So if you want to read a news article, a blog post, you don't actually have to read it with your eyes anymore, assuming you can, of course. You can just listen to it using the web reader. But if you've ever tried to use those features, the synthetic speech that gets produced is, okay, it's clear, it's understandable, but it's very synthetic. It doesn't really pause for dramatic effect. The volume doesn't rise and fall, doesn't quicken when there's something exciting happening, or slow down when they want you to really pay attention. Synthetic speech on its own doesn't really do that. There are technologies that let you do it. If you create skills for the Echo, for example, you can use speech synthesis markup language to do exactly that. Build in pauses, change the volume, change the pitch, all of those kind of things. But you can't do it with your content in the browser. So when someone uses a web reader, you have no design control over how that content is presented. And I think that's a real shame. So we should innovate in that area. We should get CSS speech. And then there's recognition. When you use one of the web readers, you've got some limited voice choices. Depends on the platform and the browser you're using, but they're pretty boring voices. There's not much to choose from. And that's fine. They're all free and they're freely available. But actually, what you'll find, I think, is that given the ability to use voice and CSS speech, we'll see more people choosing voice that becomes the brand of their content. I've got a blog, I've got a website. So I might actually, if I was so inclined, I could clone my voice. I have actually done this and experimented with it. I could use my own voice, so you could, heaven forbid, listen to me read my blog posts to you. Really terrible thought. I don't really suggest it, but you get the picture. Famous actors might give their voices up for, really famous brands. But there's all sorts of possibilities where we could really choose the brand recognition of our content by having a much wider choice of voices or even unique voices. It just brings it together to be, I think, a much richer voice experience. We talk with almost all our technology today, except for really what's in the browser. And I think that's a shame. But there is one thing I do need to touch on, and that's screen reader users, people like me. Everybody thinks that because I'm a screen reader user, when I say we need CSS speech, I'm advocating for it because I'm a screen reader user. And I'm actually not. I think web readers are a far more interesting first use case than screen readers. But don't get me wrong, I get bored to tears listening to my screen reader because everything sounds the same. Doesn't matter if it's reading about kittens up trees, about the latest terrible American president. It's just all the same voice at the same speed, at the same cadence, the same rhythm, and ugh. And yeah, I've been listening to one for 20 odd years now, and yeah, I'm bored. So CSS speech might give us a way to change that. We've got to be careful about it, though, because the concern is people could very easily, unintentionally destroy our ability to listen to content with our screen readers. And of course, we do not want that. The thinking is that if we look at design on the web at the moment, there are too many examples of poor color contrast that mean that people with low vision can't read the content. Too many examples of tiny, text size, which means anyone with poor eyesight or anyone who's maybe over 45 or 50 can't read it properly. And so the worry is that if we extend that to what happens to our screen reader's speech, will cause similar problems. Stuff won't be listenable to, and that will represent a very big problem. I'm reasonably optimistic that this won't happen for a couple of reasons, and that's because speech is a far more universal thing than sight, color perception, and all of those sort of more conventional visual design accessibility things are. Most of us are very, very used to speaking to each other. And of course, now most of us are very, very used to speaking with our technology. But the thing that really gives me hope is that I mentioned before with SSML, it's been possible to author different voice interfaces for a while, whether it's the Google Home Assistant, the Echo, the Google TTS API, and the Microsoft API. Pretty much all of the synthetic speech generators out there on the web use SSML. And what we haven't found is lots and lots of apps and skills on those devices that are completely unusable. So I'm reasonably optimistic that with speech, we've got a better hang of these things. And with a little bit of CSS speech at our disposal, we could just lift up the experience, even for screen reader users. We would need fail-safes to be built in. We'd need ways in the browser, of course, and probably our screen readers to say, just ignore it. I'm not interested. Leave my screen reader the hell alone. Thank you very much. I quite like it the way it is. But for those of us that wanted to, there's another fail-safe that exists in the spec, and that's that all the changes you can make with the CSS properties are relative. So I can set the volume to be loud or louder, but that's always just a bit loud or louder than my current volume settings. It could be fast or faster, or slow or slower, but they're all relative to whatever my volume is, my current speaking rate is, my current pitch is. So there isn't much opportunity for really scary extremes of speeding things up or slowing them down. What it is sort of incremental kind of adjustments based around whatever the user is already doing in their settings. And I think that's a pretty sensible way for things to be done in the web when it comes to speech. So that's it, really. Some thoughts around, yes, as I say, the most amazing CSS speech module you may never have heard of, but I really hope you will start to hear more of in the future. In the Discord channel in a minute, I will share a link to the spec so you can go and have a look if you're curious. What I'd really like to ask, though, is for your help trying to convince the browser implementers that this is something we want to see, both as consumers and as creators, builders, designers of technology. They seem to think it's a not very good idea, and there isn't really any kind of clear evidence one way or the other. I'm playing a hunch. I think there is a use case for this. I'd love to see it happen. So I'm going to post a blog post where I wrote up the use case for why we need CSS speech. If you agree, perhaps I could trouble you to go and add a comment on the bottom and say so I can point to it when I next talk to browser implementers and say, hey, look, actually, there is some interest here. Perhaps we can keep talking. I think that would be great because voice stuff is really interesting and it's everywhere now except the browser, and it's time we fix that.
Thank you, Leonie. It was a super great lightning talk. Enlightening for me as well, as I never wrapped my head around CSS speech, to be honest, until now. Sadly, we couldn't play some audio stuff and had some glitches during the slides, but we will share all the links later, or we can also share it now, actually. Yeah. Thanks again. I'm really curious how this is going with CSS speech. I don't remember at which stage is it currently. Is it recommendation level already, or
no?
still,
it's what the W3C calls a candidate recommendation, but it really shouldn't be. Mm-hmm. So for a specification to have reached candidate implementation, really, it needs to be in a position where you've got implementer interest. And if you haven't already got at least 2 implementations of every feature, you should be well on your way to having that, that happen within the next sort of weeks or months. And as I said, CSS speech doesn't really have that at all at the moment because it's been around for so long. I think it was able to move to candidate recommendation. It just sort of sneaked off there quietly while nobody was looking, I think. Yeah, now, we're paying a bit more attention to this sort of a thing. I don't think it should be a candidate recommendation, but it is where it is. And I really hope we can find those implementations.
Yeah, there was a question in the chat saying we have EM and strong text. Why not the same kind of thing for voices or better speech in CSS? That's the thing, right?
Yeah, exactly that. It's equitable. If I were to suggest that we actually stopped having CSS at all, so everybody had to just use, the default browser style, so every website looked the same. I don't know what the defaults look like these days. Last time I actually saw a web page back in the 90s, the default was all blue links and maroon colored visited links and white background. That was about it. All hell would break loose. The whole community would just be, no, I'm not having every web page look that bad and look the same. And yet that's kind of what we're saying is okay for voice interfaces. So you're right. Sorry, whoever posted that comment, I absolutely agree. It's kind of equity of experience for different interaction forms.
I think actually it's kind of weird. Screen readers don't interpret M and strong tags. Before I used the screen reader for the first time, I thought they would. Like they would emphasize the words you put into an M tag or something like that, but they don't.
Right. Yeah. And at least one screen reader, JAWS, it has this notion sort of built into it, not that's author controlled, but it has what it calls a sound scheme. So if you have it enabled, it will read headings in one voice and links in another, and the text content in another, and it just does it for itself. It's not website specific, it's screen reader specific. And I turn it on every now and again just for a bit of variety. So even the screen reader vendors understand that there is perhaps a use case for not everything sounding exactly the same. So yeah.
There's another comment. It's sad and amazing that there is something out there that is still not over the status as a candidate. For sure, I would like to see that in real life, he said. Yeah.
please post a comment on the blog post and help me convince the browsers.
And someone also said, like, yeah, but JAWS is the one that is very expensive, sadly. I'm not sure if it's sad, but they have reasons for their prices. It's a very complex software, right? And they have a unique setting, so to say. They are very good, but yeah, it's not for cheap.
It is complex software, but so are the free ones, and they're just as good. So there's no real need to pay the money now for JAWS. Few people do. I only do because it's the one I used when it was still pretty much one of the only choices around, and I've just never switched away from using it much. But actually, if I was to lose my site today, I would probably use Narrator on Windows or VoiceOver on my Mac.
Mm-hmm. I just, in my mind, I currently just have like such a big gap between like not a knowledge gap, but like, yeah, on the one side, like what you just showed and talked about, CSS Speech is a super new, exciting feature where we are all waiting for. But on the other side, I mean, I do front end also like for 20 years. We are lacking still so many things on a basic level. Like there's such, like, on the one hand, like that there are super advancements and interesting developments driven by you at the W3C in this area. But when I look at the web AAM report, we still don't know how to place alt attributes. We don't care about much focus things, right? So that's I think the reality is something in between, and it's really just a big gap I see here. Like we like people like you and others, they kind of emphasize, or in a more drastic way, complain for such a long time that not only developers, I mean, there are other people also responsible, but at the end, front end is like putting things together in the web, that there are so many things still wrong, which would be easy to fix as well, right? So this is it wouldn't make sense that, for example, we have a web application who might be able to incorporate CSS speech features, but if you cannot access it with like a keyboard or with VoiceOver properly, or what, like, get into this, then yeah, that's exactly, I think, the main thing still currently. I have the feeling we as developers maybe are kind of breaking what the web offers since its beginning, right? Like you just mentioned in the beginning, the last time, or before you went blind, everything like had blue links and things. This was before CSS was a thing.
Almost,
yeah, and the web is prepared for this, so to say, like by the core architecture and the standards of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, ARIA. It's all there, but it's not ideal still, right? So there's this the bigger complexity also nowadays. Like, we don't say much today on websites. We're more talking about web applications. That's another topic to discuss. Not sure if everything needs to be a web application nowadays, but yeah. So the tooling is complex around it, and there's also lack of knowledge. And yeah, that's just me complaining.
No, you're
Sorry.
right. And I think it's, on the one hand, here's me jumping up and down, getting all excited about something I'd like the browsers to implement because it's new and it's shiny. Well, it's not new, but it would be if it was supported. But on the other hand, you're right. There is so much stuff that is not new. It's not sexy. It's not exciting, but it really needs fixing. And I do worry that there is a bit of a kind of tendency for the new and exciting to get prioritized over the boring, but actually really useful. We've all done, so much extra coding just to work around or fix stuff that if it could be fixed in the browsers would save us all countless hours and an awful lot of bytes of code. But yeah, it's, it is what it is, I guess. Hidde, you probably deal with this far more than I do.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, and I actually have some of that in my talk too, right? There's a lot of old and boring bits that need fixing, and I can't wait for that to happen.
Cool. Hidde, why don't we start with a lightning talk then about CMS accessibility? I think that's the right moment.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, CMSs are old and boring. I mean, some of them are, but super necessary for a web that creates accessible content. I mean, a lot of web pages are dependent on their CMS to create a content and ensure that it's accessible. Yeah, sure. Let's do this. Yeah, you have my slides there.
Yes.
I'll reset my timer. I'll try and keep it into a lightning format. So this talk is about your CMS as an accessibility assistant. And this is an idea I had floating around when I worked at the W3C on authoring tool accessibility. One thing I noticed or we noticed there, right, is that a lot of accessibility can be done within the CMS, and it's a way to make accessibility happen earlier or shift it left, so to say. So that's exciting. This talk builds a bit on that, also giving some other examples of where we could potentially do accessibility earlier and sort of more easily. I already introduced myself. On this slide, it says I do have a blog. It's on Hidde.blog. I got that URL just so that I can put it in a slide deck because it's nice and short. Now, anyway, I talk to developers a lot as part of my work. And one question that I get very often is a little bit of a sigh, and then they go, why isn't accessibility easier? I get this question from developers who don't want to do accessibility and who are kind of annoyed that they have to do that work. That's nonsense, right? I mean, they have to do that work. I also get this question from developers who are very convinced that they need to prioritize accessibility and make it one of their main things that they focus on. There's a whole genre of developers that focus on accessibility and that want to build accessible components first. And from them, I get this question too. They also ask me, why isn't it easier? Now, part of my responsibility at W3C, or a project I worked on, was to make accessibility easier in some ways, like to make some of the documents easier. And it is really hard. It is really hard to make websites these days that are accessible. I think it could be better. And one of the ways that it could be easier, and again, I need to stress that no one deserves to have accessibility to be easier, right? I mean, accessibility needs to exist, and if it was very hard, it would still need to be done. But if accessibility is made easier, I think we would get a lot more of it. And one way to do that is to build in accessibility, to find ways that accessibility is built into things. And I think my slides are not actually advancing. Let me stop my screen and I'll pop it back.
Turn it off and on again.
Yeah, I'll do the old turning it off and on again. So again, I had that quote on there. Why isn't accessibility easier? So one way to do that, I think, is to build in accessibility to some of our tools in a sensible way. Now, I'll start with the nonsensical way, and that is to create so-called overlays. This is something I don't recommend, or I don't recommend using them, because overlays, as they are known, they are bits of software that promise to fix accessibility issues in content automatically for you. That would be really cool, and it would make accessibility a lot easier, but that is not something we need to look for. The problem with these overlays, although they sound great in theory, is that in practice they are ineffective. And that is something that has broad agreement among accessibility practitioners, as it says on a website called overlayfactsheet.com. Okay, so that's not the way. Overlays would help if they would work, but they don't. Other things, though, where we could build in accessibility are readily available, like design systems. Design systems are systems of components that people build. They collect them so that they can reuse them. Now, they provide an opportunity to reuse whatever you've got. So if you have something that is quite bad and inaccessible, you can repeat your inaccessibility. But if you make something that's very good, you can repeat your accessibility. You can repeat good patterns, and that is very valuable. So if design systems are used effectively, they can repeat and reuse accessibility, and I think that's great. Another thing that design systems will enable us to do is to document stuff around accessibility. There's a lot of nuance often around how a component should be used within a page, for instance. So documentation is something we can fold into a design system, and whenever we tell people to use our design system within like a large organization, they would also potentially see that documentation where we put in the right details, like don't use it this way, do use it that way, that sort of thing. And we can kind of embed complex components in there, because if you build a complex component, there's a lot of ways you could do it right or wrong. And if you manage to get it right, again, being able to repeat that is valuable. And we can include tests that are per component. So design systems are a valuable part to kind of automate and build in some of our accessibility. Now, thirdly, browsers are a place where we could fix accessibility issues automatically. Leonie already mentioned it. Browsers could do a much better job in fixing some accessibility issues and addressing some of the problems. I actually did a lightning talk at a conference called Web We Want a couple of years ago, where I kind of tried to argue for this. Can browsers do some of this automatically? And I listed a couple of examples. This is awkward to kind of put my own slides into my own slides, but sorry, I'm that person. One example is to fix focus indication. And that is the example I kind of started this experiment with. There's a lot to do about focus indication, including 3 new potential success criteria and a new version of WCAG. But ultimately, what focus indication people need could be forced by a browser. There could be a setting in a browser that makes a focus indication that is so clear that people don't need to rely on websites to provide it. And we could skip basically that whole step. Of course, there's a lot of ifs and buts, but there could be a checkbox in your browser where you say, I just always want to see where my focus is, and the browser could always show you where your focus is in a way that's very clear, or maybe you want it less clear, it could be customizable. That's the experiment I started with, and there's a bunch of other things where a browser could step in and fix problems, like auto-playing GIFs and videos. It could have a setting where if you don't want autoplay, you could not have that, or color contrast even. There could be a setting where the browser sees there is not enough contrast and adds a backplate to text that would otherwise be invisible or hard to read. Truncated text is another example where people put 3 little dots behind the product name so that you can't see what the product name is. Again, a browser could undo that. If it's done with CSS, it could turn that CSS off. So there's a bunch of things that browsers could do too. I started a community group together with Eric Eckert and a few other people at the W3C, trying to sort of document some of these features and figure out if we could potentially convince browser makers to do it. That unfortunately kind of stalled because we all kind of got busy with other things. But yeah, it's still something I believe in, not to make life of developers easier necessarily, but just to try and make things better for users if it's possible to do that. And I think there are opportunities like that. Now, another place where we could automatically improve accessibility is in HTML by offering more accessibility by default components. Or they should say accessible by default components. So components that ship in the browser that are tested by the people who make the browser components. And if there are bugs, they could be fixed by the people who make the browser rather than by every individual website owner around the world. So I think that is something where HTML could really shine. I'm thinking about components like, well, let's say you have a select element on a web page. That is accessible, so it's better to use that than to use a div and build your own. And HTML could have a bunch more elements that exist in HTML that people could just go and use, where the accessibility part is kind of taken care of by the browser. Yeah, I think there could be a lot of value there. There are also a bunch of different elements where there's still sort of bugs in default elements, like the video element. There's a couple of small things. If browser makers would fix them, there would be better defaults and less kind of work put onto developers, but also less kind of reliance on individual websites. So, websites could be made more accessible systematically rather than by individual website owners. And then the last one where it could be better is the CMS, because the CMS could really help put accessibility in the authoring process. And I have phrased that as CMS as an accessibility assistant, but I kind of believe that when content is created, you could run automated checks basically on the content and find certain types of problems. Not everything, of course, and that goes for all of what I've mentioned today, right? Not everything could be fixed by browsers or by design systems or by any of those, but there are identifiable steps and things that could be done within these systems, kind of freeing time in developers and also making things better across the board. So CMS accessibility is defined in its own standards. So if you assess the accessibility of CMS, you'd usually, or web content, you'd usually use WCAG, right? The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There is another standard called ATAC, which is specifically for the accessibility of authoring tools. There is even its own report tool, the ATAC report tool, that I helped build, so kind of shout out to myself. But this tool exists also for authoring tool makers to figure out how accessible their tool is. Now, I wanted to show you a couple of things that a CMS could do to support the production of accessible content. That is basically what the B part of the ATAC standard is all about. Now, what do we mean by accessible content? It's basically things like tables with headers, form fields with labels, hero images with sufficient contrast, video with captions, content that's multilingual and has lang attributes, content that's nested according to spec, carousels that you can pause, sensible heading structures, all these sorts of things. And I think they're all examples of things that the CMS could also try and help avoid if they were not there. So they could help and flag tables that don't have headers. They could flag nameless form fields. They could flag heroes that have illegible content. They could flag videos where captions are missing. Content that doesn't have the lang attributes, non-standard nesting, carousels that don't have a pause button, and they could also flag headings that don't exist for the right reasons. So a CMS could help to avoid inaccessible content, basically. That's where it would be really, really powerful. I have a couple of examples where CMSs could be used as accessibility assistants. For instance, there is a project within Joomla where something called Sally is used, and it's called Jually. And basically what it does, it will show you different issues that you have in your rich text editor. Like, oh, there are some forms without labels, or here is some parts with insufficient contrast. It can flag these things for you and can help you find them in your editor. Even WordPress Gutenberg has different checks like heading overviews, where you can see what all the headings on your web page look like. They also have something where they warn you if you have your content that with sufficient contrast, and then you change the color of your heading, and suddenly the contrast is not good. It will tell you about that. So it will have a warning that says this color combination may be hard for people to read. Try using a brighter background color. So it makes a suggestion for you. Now this all happens within a CMS, and that means it happens before a web page is published, or ideally before, right? So you're working on a new announcement, or you're working on some new part of your web page, and you're warned about accessibility issues before the page goes live. I think that's very powerful to have that in a CMS. I can show you as well. Let me see. So I have worked for a CMS called sanity.io, where a lot of the content in rich text editors is saved as data. And the advantage of that is that you can use JavaScript to then write validations that are based on your content. So you can kind of traverse the tree of your content, meaning that you can do things like figure out, hey, there's some text there that is less than a certain amount of characters, or it doesn't end in a period. So maybe that's actually a heading. Or where you see a couple of words that start with a dash, and you could see, hey, maybe that should be an actual list. Or you could find a link that says click here, and again you can recognize, hey, it has click here as a link text, so that's probably not a good accessible link. You probably want to use a more readable name for your link. So all these sorts of things are things that you could fire at a content view and basically find problems before they ship to a client. And there's lots of validations that you can do while you create content. So maybe do the headings have enough hierarchy? Do you have any empty links? Are there links that only contain images? And if so, do they have an alternative because accessible name of the link, that sort of thing. So yeah, there's a lot that you can do within the CMS to try and make that work. So in conclusion, accessibility can't be automated, and not everything has an easy fix, but there are issues that we can build into design systems in browsers, in HTML, and in CMSs. Use a CMS that can be set up to work as an accessibility assistant for your content editors, because then you can find problems before they actually ship. Now you could have a CMS where you can do custom validations and previews. That could be very powerful. And lastly, accessibility is generally easier whenever you do it earlier. So whatever you can take out of the kind of development process or even post-development process, and problems that are on live websites, if you can fix them before the website goes live, it's usually better and cheaper as well. Now, this is a very short version of a much longer talk, but I hope I kind of got the point across. I want to thank you for listening to this today, and looking forward to chat more about the possibilities of CMSs or design systems or other tools.
Thank you. Another cool inspirational talk. Yeah, from just a spontaneous thought from my side. I hear an issue. Oh. Okay, again. Anyway, like when I last touched CMS, like Typo 3 or WordPress, I think it was like 10 years ago. They were really crappy, to be honest, in terms of accessibility support. They mixed up HTML output. There was no guidance at all for editors, of course. Do you have any insights, like how WordPress or other ones are tackling this currently? Like how they approach better accessibility support?
It's really a kind of glass half full, half empty kind of situation, as it is with many things. So both WordPress and Drupal have specific teams focusing on accessibility. But especially at WordPress, they struggle to get all the things in that they want. At Drupal, that seems to be a bit more organized. The CMS I used to work at Sanity.io, they do a good job, but I can say that because I've done the auditing. There's a blog post online that you can read as well that goes a bit more into how I've personally audited that CMS and tried to figure out how to make it better. But yeah, from what I've seen in different CMSs, is that some things are surprisingly well built, and often that's because they use components that have been well tested or things like that. But a lot of it is kind of in a bad state, and I think that's because while WCAG gets a lot of attention, also in legal frameworks and things like that, you can't really get away with building a government website, for instance, that isn't accessible, but you can easily get away with building a CMS that isn't accessible or doesn't help with accessibility. And yeah, that's something that I would like to see change. Not only because I think that's better, but also because I think it will actually make everyone's life much easier if a CMS doesn't get in the way of accessibility, or even better, if it kind of can help push accessibility and then make things more accessible and create better markup and stuff like that. And some of these things are actually getting easier. Like some CMSs are more customizable and kind of more component based, and it actually makes it easier to fix some of the problems that maybe in the 90s or the 2000s would be really hard or unthinkable. Like some very big corporate CMSs, it would be unthinkable to try and fix accessibility things, whereas maybe in WordPress, it's somewhat easier to create a plugin. I don't know, I haven't done recently. I've done some plugins for Sanity, and that was just some lines of JavaScript. So, not everyone writes JavaScript fluently, but if you do, then it's somewhat easy or possible to try and take matters in your own hands, even if the CMS doesn't do it.
Leonie, from your side, do you have experience in being an editor of a CMS?
Yes, I used to use WordPress for my own website until I switched over to an 11T build a couple of years ago. And as a screen reader user, certainly WordPress has got a lot of advantages. There was a very hard-working, committed accessibility team, excuse me, within the WordPress community. As Hidde just said, I think they found it harder to make changes as much as they'd want to than within other communities, which is really sad. I think it's an interesting one. I know I used to work for an agency in Bristol here in the UK 10 years or more ago now. And we ran into this problem all the time there, so much so that they actually created an in-house CMS at the time that was accessible to use, but also capable of outputting accessible content. It was Drupal based because at the time, I think that was sort of Drupal 7 kind of era. They had, Drupal had some really good sort of accessibility features in it and was quite capable. And I think they've continued to do some good work there. But I admit it's been a good few years since I've really, got amongst a CMS in any kind of reasonable way.
Mm-hmm. Let me see, there were some comments in the audience. John Lockhart is writing, at the University of Edinburgh, we are working towards our upcoming web publishing platform. The things you are discussing are in line with the goal of the project. Do you know anything about it, Hidde? Or do you know each other? Yeah.
I don't know about this platform. It sounds really interesting. And something I've seen more, Leonie just mentioned that at the agency they built their own platform, and I've seen more. Also, news organizations commonly do this, they build their own platform because it's hard to rely on the existing stuff.
Also, John said around Drupal is quite a good place, or it has become a good place when it comes to accessibility, in his opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone of you use Drupal in the round?
No.
I'm pretty much hooked by 11T, a bit late to the party. And it's a bit smaller, and it's not a typical CMS, I would say, like a bigger one like the others, but it looks very appealing, especially in terms of accessibility, because just not much JavaScript involved to render something.
Yeah, I think any system where you get full control over your markup is great, right? If you know what you're doing. That's the caveat, I guess. Yeah.
I see, in my world, I see a lot of JavaScript-heavy applications. What is your take on how much the usage of JavaScript, like usage technically, like how much a browser uses of this, but also how much developers tackle with JavaScript? How much influences this, like accessibility support, in your opinion? In my opinion, and then I stop talking, is like the more JavaScript we do, it's not the amount, but like maybe the quality of how we do JavaScript and how, or which frameworks we use, or what accessibility support is like in the frameworks. I would say that this has a bad impact on accessibility in general. Like if a developer just like blindly, for example, starts doing something with React, and that's all, and creates something, not caring much about semantics maybe, and the output, then like the problems come from the JavaScript side, in my opinion, right?
I think it's a difficult one. I don't think it's the JavaScript that's the problem. I think you mentioned it just in what you said there. It's the quality of the HTML particularly, but also the CSS to some extent that these frameworks render. That's the problem. I mean, JavaScript's got its problems. Aside from that, performance is one, obviously, but in strict accessibility terms, the JavaScript itself isn't a problem. It's what the JavaScript does or produces. That's where the accessibility stuff really starts to go wrong. And I understand why they're so popular. They make development, iteration much quicker, much easier. And for most of us out there, we're working to deadlines. We've got a boss somewhere kind of saying, got to get it done, move faster. So, they've got a huge appeal. But the problem is with the frameworks themselves, and just quite frankly, they need to get better at doing what they do, because then what developers and authors have at their disposal, the tools that they need to use, will take a lot of that problem away.
Yeah, maybe just one thought on that. I think some JavaScript libraries make it very easy to build inaccessible things. But I agree with Leonie. JavaScript itself is not the problem. JavaScript can help a lot with accessibility. Just look at the area standard, which is most of the time based on dynamic JavaScript. So it just depends on how you use it.
Yeah. And without JavaScript, we wouldn't be able to develop features that are excellent for accessibility. Infinite scroll, for example, is wonderful if you've got a mouse and you can just sit there scrolling the wheel to your heart's content. But if you're a keyboard user, it's really hard physical work to have to get through it. So, with a bit of JavaScript, we can offer people a choice between infinite scroll and paginated navigation through content. There's hundreds of examples like that where, because of JavaScript, we can flip things around. We can give people choices in the way they do things. We can ask them if they'd like to personalize the way content's presented. Again, it's not JavaScript itself, it's what we do with it. And like most things in tech, yes, there are some really good examples and there are some really horrible ones. So, yeah.
And actually, I've seen sometimes that people use JavaScript to kind of codify good HTML. Like Léonie said, it's so important to have good HTML more than the JavaScript being the problem. And sometimes, like I see people build a React component library, for instance, that basically spits out HTML ultimately. And if they do that in a way that also doesn't render to the client, as they call it, so it doesn't ship any JavaScript to the browser, you wouldn't notice it in the browser, then that can be super powerful, because then even the developers who are maybe less proficient in HTML, they can still use good components that are well built. And there are even people taking like the ARIA examples and then building them into React components so that you can use them in a way without actually understanding all of that. A little bit dangerous, if you ask me, but also really exciting, because it means that these things actually become a whole lot easier to use. It's almost close to having them in HTML, because they drop in the component and then they don't need to worry about the nitty-gritty. So yeah, sometimes the frameworks can help.
Yeah, if used wisely. Yeah.
Yes.
If used wisely, yeah, by the right people and et cetera, yeah.
I do think that's possibly one area where I think things have changed not so much for the good, is that the rise in use of frameworks and libraries, I think, have created a time, an era where developers don't really understand quite how powerful HTML is. And actually you see it on social media a lot. Is HTML a programming? Is CSS a programming language? You can set off whole wars. I know I'm not going to do that. I'm not even going to go there. But I think that the fact that most developers these days are actually concentrating on writing JavaScript and quite constrained JavaScript, that's specific to getting a particular framework or library to do a particular thing. I think it's lessened the understanding in actually what HTML does do. The whole idea of semantics, a div is not a substitute for other HTML elements, especially not if you're a keyboard user, a screen reader user, all sorts of other kinds of user. And I think that knowledge has perhaps lessened a bit from those of us who grew up in a time where there was only HTML and you kind of understood that you had elements for different tasks and things like that. And I hope that will swing back around again. These things often do. But HTML is incredibly important. It's incredibly powerful because the browsers have implemented it to have so much information for free built into it. Not just accessibility information, but, the default styles, all the form controls that have, default interactions, all of that kind of stuff. It's actually a remarkably capable language when you think about it. And it's kind of important to remember that. So I hope we'll get back to that sort of, we need to understand all these things and make them work together is the kind of philosophy I hope we'll get to.
Mm.
Yeah, I think a good example of a powerful HTML is the new dialogue element. I'm not sure if it's perfectly implemented in every browser right now, but as I see it, it makes dialogue so much easier, and it's a focus trap and so on. It does lots of stuff you had to implement yourself before.
Yeah, and it just reduces the amount of code you need, and that's good for performance. So the knock-on effect is good in so many directions.
Yeah, I really hope that things like dialogue and also that new popover attribute, if it makes it to other browsers, I think that's going to be really good for like a resurgence of HTML interest. People like, hey, that HTML, that's actually quite a nice language. It's very powerful. Let's use it more and dive into the HTML spec for other magic stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, let's make HTML as awesome as JavaScript is again, right? I think today's approach in frontend is really mostly coming down from like a framework level, creating something for the web. And I'm also coming from the time where you, like you just said, start bottom up, so to say, and then progressively enhance through the layers, right? So you first care for the semantics, then you take a look how it gets styled and how it looks without breaking the semantics, and by using also like the native functionalities mostly. And then, yeah, for all the interactive parts, you take JavaScript. And nowadays it's a bit like, I perceive it at least, that it's a bit the other way around, that sometimes like accessibility, that's a whole separate topic as well. Sometimes accessibility is like tackled like a feature to be addressed afterwards, right? So this is also wrong in my opinion. Yeah, but you more like try to fix things later, right? When you're like working 90% with a framework to implement the required UI and create this high level of interactivity, then you're sometimes missing like, or taking a look, how often do you take a look at like what the bundle output is, like the quality of the HTML is there, right? How often do you test with keyboards, at least on a basic level? That's sometimes a bit lost, I would say, in nowadays times.
Yeah, and it's hard with some of the frameworks to fix some of the output. You know, even if you're a developer who really, really wants to do it, you know, in some cases it's really not easy trying to unpick, you know, which particular element or which particular, you know, handler is attached to what in the code that's being rendered by some of these frameworks. It can take a long time to work out what on earth's going on, to know where you've got to go and apply the accessibility fixes. And as I say, you know, if you're working in a team that's busy and you've got deadlines to hit, you know, even if you really want to do it, sometimes it's just not practical to do it, and that's a real shame too.
Yeah. Let me just add like a colleague called Manuel to the stream. Just as a teaser for you, Manu. He wrote something interesting in the chat, and I also want to give him the chance to say it again verbally. So here you go.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I mean, when we were just talking about this topic of how powerful HTML is, I mean, I recently came across some element in there that is called summary and or details, and it has the summary tag, and it's actually exactly that collapsible that every component library is by now delivering. And if this would be a little bit more stylable, I think we could then use this for the design part too, and then we have, as so often with HTML, basically the chance that the browsers can implement it correctly, that this is at one central place, because then the developers that is making a component library don't have to think about this. They don't need to be aware of this, which I think is the main problem a little bit. If the people that have good ideas how to make a component, that have good ideas about design, are not aware that there are people out there that need these features, then they don't have it on a radar and it will be overlooked somehow. And I think their awareness and using the standards and enhancing the standards could be really something how we could pursue this, that it's not adding to the workload of teams.
Mm-hmm.
It is actually quite stylable. What are you missing?
Maybe I'm too new to this, but to change this little triangle indicator, there,
that's
I didn't
easy.
find
That's
you
easy. That has been done. I'm going to post a link to the chat. I've done a CodePen demo of this, and you can also animate it. The only thing which is not so easy to animate is if you close it. Opening and closing, but it's quite stylable.
And it's lovely.
I only recently discovered that. I also wrote in the comment, shame on me, that this handy thing was so long not on my radar, especially as accessibility is something that at least I take kind of seriously, because I was coming across this very early in my life with the colorblind uncle that didn't see when the television tube was shifting and one color was not there. Or also with a colleague that was crawling into the monitor, they said, I cannot read this, and said, okay, this contrast is actually quite good. Wait, this is turquoise on pink. I'm not sure why my colleagues at that point in time did that, but at that point in time I remembered, and since then there is a certain awareness. But you need this kind of key moments, I think, to actually come across this somehow. So raising awareness, I see as a huge topic.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be too hard on yourself either. Details and summary took a long time to get cross-browser support. It's had it for a little while now, but it didn't happen as soon as HTML5 came out. It took a few years to get certainly enough cross-browser support for it to be production useful. So yeah, if you've only just discovered it, don't worry. Plus, there's hundreds of HTML elements out there. It's yeah, there are always new ones to discover.
One of my favorite Sunday afternoon activities is going through that HTML spec and read on. Like, there's so much in there. It's just, and I recommend it actually. Like, people should occasionally check because there's lots of stuff in there. It's very well documented.
Yeah, yeah. You never know what you'll find that's useful.
Like,
So yeah, I just remembered
go ahead.
there's a whole CSS tricks article about animating details in summary.
Cool.
And it's quite good.
Then I can look with keywords or Google.
Yes, I just posted a link to the chat, so you can grab there.
Yeah, and as I say, it's
Then
really nice.
I will forward this also to the other people on YouTube quickly.
Yeah, I did that.
Because for me it didn't come there yet.
Oh,
maybe my browser is lacking.
I think Moritz, you posted it in our speakers chat, but I posted.
I did both actually, but maybe my chat isn't working.
Anyhow, we have it on YouTube now. Maybe twice. Okay, and we will collect. I mean, I couldn't stop myself basically like opening 30 browser tabs or so, and I think we don't have that much time or don't want to spend too much time sitting in front of a computer this evening after a working day. So there are so many interesting things which are really, really exciting and bringing the web forward, in my opinion, quite a lot. The whole front-end area, in my opinion, with this big advancements in CSS, which are, in my opinion, sometimes underrated. Not many developers know that the awesome power, like we also had some power with CSS like 20 years ago when CSS was new. This was like a relief. Now we could separate the styling from the semantics and such things. But and then floats were a thing, and then we were happy with achieving some layouts with floats, and then it became ugly, and then like Flexbox became the cool thing, and so on and so on. And there is so many things also in ARIA and accessibility in general, connecting also or allowing with all these standards to provide a better web, basically, right? To have more stable layouts, for example, to get rid of these cross-browser issues, to create really well-working applications with the frameworks, and to have lots of the functionalities, which I remember also like styling select boxes. Of course, this was a pain as hell. If you gave up fighting with designers why they wanted to have it, that's a separate topic. Sometimes you just style something like it's required. And then it's, things get hard sometimes. And I appreciate a lot that also like the browser vendors are super open for quite a long time to listen to and incorporate feedback from developers and ship things early and things like this. This is awesome times in my opinion in front end, but also still big responsibilities to make accessibility better. Yeah.
I mean, what I came, I'm not sure if it was a React feature or if it was specific to Gatsby.js when I was working on websites, that basically there are things in the console that tell you as a developer while you are developing the thing, like you're missing an ARIA label, or you are making an on-click onto a div and you're not declaring it as a button and stuff like that. It's just something that in the bunch of error messages that sometimes because of all the JavaScript libraries that also have other issues in the background, just drown basically in the information overload that you may get depending on what you're working with. And especially regarding components, it's important that you, when you choose, at least that is my strategy, that I do these people have accessibility on their radar? Because if there is a component and I want to build on that thing somehow, then it's always something where I'm saying it's actually not worth it. But this may be then also the part where we as developers need to stand up more and actually talk to our POs, to our customers, and say, hey, there are reasons for this, and maybe use the tools that are there, like browser plugins that help you to visualize how the things look for people that don't have the perfect vision, or how it is when you have Parkinson and cannot work with a mouse. Because the mentioned focus issue was also something that I remember that in the beginning, every designer was saying, oh, you can focus, basically make none. So let's get rid of these ugly dots around. And the people didn't know what they are actually doing there. I think it's a little bit better now, but still, we have to talk to our designers regarding this. That is still one of the challenges I see.
Yeah. I was attending like the XCon conference last week, an awesome conference for all of you who could not attend. Do it next year. It's free. It's the biggest global accessibility conference by DQ. And there was, you're laughing?
I'm laughing because it's not the biggest conference, but
oh,
yes.
sorry, really? Okay.
Yes.
What is the bigger one?
I believe Inclusive Design 24 is bigger, but we run it for longer, so it's maybe an unfair comparison. It's a 24-hour conference, so yeah.
Oh, and shame on me.
Recommended. That has really good content.
Yeah, shame on me. I forgot to mention it. You're also running this Inclusive Design 24 one-day
I am
conference,
biased.
right? Yes,
completely.
Exactly. This is worth to attend as well. I missed it last year. But still, like, watching some of the videos is on my 3,000 items to-do list somehow. So many things going on. But on XCon there were some also awesome talks. I remember around how you can, with React especially, style the components in a way that like the tab index and the focus handling is working better, and super awesome stuff there going on. Sometimes, just lacking some time to dig into the things. There's a lot of things going on, yeah. And also, like Manu, like you said, to educate others, like that accessibility is not a feature, should not be an afterthought, like as part of like removing technical debt or so. Sometimes it's treated like this. Let's do it later. Let's do level A first, and then level AA maybe later if there's time and budget. I don't know. And sometimes only if like kind of lawsuits are feared of, then okay, some action is taken. I think this is also sometimes happening like this. Yeah. Let's see.
Seems the chat had a little hiccup. I see people saying that,
yes.
Most of my messages are gone.
Yeah, I don't know. Some messages are really gone, but I want to bring an interesting question to the round. ChatGPT and stuff. What can AI bring to accessibility in the future? What's your opinion?
It could be really interesting.
It's such a big question.
About Copilot. The thing is, when they are only trained on the past things and accessibility is an afterthought in the training data, how should this thing know?
I have one very concrete example, and I think that's captions. So people who want to caption their videos have a lot less of an excuse these days, because it's much easier to have an AI-powered thingy to send a video to and get AI-based captions back. And then when you want to make your captions, you need to spend less effort because you only need to correct the mistakes that are in there rather than start from scratch. So it's like as a building material for captions and transcripts, it can be very useful. I have less trust in like asking some bot to make something accessible, I think. it's likely to have the wrong type of bias in there. It would be nice if we could make a bot out of all the people who know a lot about accessibility, but it's probably going to scrape the whole web, and that doesn't look very good.
I mean, we've certainly seen that, the so-called accessibility overlays that claim to use artificial intelligence, or at least machine learning, to use JavaScript to be a quick fix for your website's accessibility, don't really tend to work all that well, and can, if not carefully constructed, cause more problems than they claim to solve. So I agree with Hidde in that respect. I don't think that's the way AI is going to be useful, but I am curious to see what it can do in a more general sense. So obviously there's been a lot in the news last week about the version 4 of ChatGPT, and it's in the middle of being added to an app that I use called Be My Eyes. And it's a free app that means as a blind person, I can call on a volunteer, and there are millions of volunteers all over the world. So wherever I am in the world, I can just tap on a button and I'll get put through to some poor soul somewhere. And using our mobile cameras, I can point my phone at something and say, tell me how to work this aircon control if I'm in a hotel room, that kind of thing. And it's amazing. But they're introducing the new version of ChatGPT into it, so that instead of having to ask a human volunteer, you've got the option of asking it. And again, it'll just pass the image, whatever you point your phone at, and tell you information about it. And they're claiming, and I haven't tried it myself yet, that you can do things like point at the contents of your fridge. And it'll not only tell you what's in there, but it'll also, if you ask it, suggest things that you might want to cook, or recipes to use up what's in your fridge, which, I'm laughing, but that kind of thing I think is incredible. If we can use artificial intelligence to recognize, the world around us for someone who can't see it, I think the potential there is enormous. But yes, we do have to acknowledge the bias factor, because it's very real and it's very scary. So yes, another one of those things, like earlier when I said there's some really good examples and there's some really horrible ones too. And this seems to be another case of that.
I've been thinking about, like said before, alternative texts auto-generated by AI, but these have been around for quite some time, because a few years ago, the server that served the images of Instagram was down, and then you saw that apparently Instagram auto-generated alternative texts for the images. You can't put them there yourself. You can say, I'm going to put, I know the alternative text to this image, but they are auto-generating them. And I think that's a good usage of AI for accessibility, because the auto-generated alternative text for an image is better than none.
Right. And that's the important thing, I think. When that first started happening on the web, a lot of people, oh no, those are terrible text descriptions. They're really bad. Take them away. And they missed the point that compared with nothing at all, any description is pretty much useful. Even if it just tells you there is a person in this picture, you don't know, what gender they identify as, whether they've got long hair, whether they're wearing a suit or a dress, or nothing. Just knowing it's a person is better than not knowing that at all. But they've still got a long way to come before they can replace really good authored text descriptions, especially when it gets down to complex images. I blogged about this on my website a year or two back, and I used a painting. It's a favorite of mine by Salvador Dali. And when you've got something like that that's just got so much content in it, so much nuance and things like that, I forget what the my screen reader's AI text description came up with, but it was kind of okay. But I don't think if I hadn't have known that's what it was describing, I'd have guessed. But you're right. Yeah, it's steps in the right direction, isn't it?
Still, I think we should not rely too much on the AI in general. I mean, we still should, whenever we produce content, make sure that we are also having the other people in mind. I'm not sure if AI can help with that in some ways. Maybe when people are about to post or totally overlooking these things, that in apps the people could get a nudge or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be a nice sort of gap bridge between those two things, wouldn't it? You know, if you were authoring something, posting a picture on social media or in your CMS, and the image generation said, hey, you haven't added a text description, here's a suggested text description. And I remember years ago doing some research, and we found that if you prompted people with a text description, they were more likely to edit one that you gave them than they were to provide one in the first place. And I think it's because people tend to read something and go, oh, no, that's not quite right. I can do better, or I'll tweak it. But whatever, it had a much more kind of positive effect. So yes, if we could use AI to kind of, as you say, nudge authors to then go on and do a really good job, that would be a good outcome, I think.
That may play into this thing with the internet. If you ask somebody for help, nobody answers. But if you just say something wrong, you will immediately find somebody correcting it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I also shared something in the chat regarding this nudging before. It's not an AI, it's just a bot on Mastodon that I'm following. And whenever you're posting something without an alt text or repost something, that thing directly comes to you with the personal message and says, hey, you have basically posted something or boosted something that doesn't think about this accessibility feature. So either you repost this or do it from scratch, or you maybe nudge the author that they next time provide an image description.
Nice.
I had seen that some people in the chat are already seemingly doing speech CS or CSS speech there with headline and stuff like that.
Cool.
Maybe we should just edit and then tell the browser the browser vendors it's there. Do something.
So in the Discord chat, I can't get to the YouTube because I can't hear too many things at once with my screen reader, but I posted there's a proof of concept that was created with help from Stuart Langridge, who may be known to many of you, that you can, there's just an editable area where you can just play around with some very simple styles. It uses the web speech API to simulate what the output would be like if we did have CSS speech. So I don't know, Jan, if you're in the Discord channel, if I could trouble you to post that over in the YouTube channel.
Yeah, I did it already before, but I will do it again
Thank you.
because there was a lot of stuff in the chat meanwhile, and it's worth to mention again. That's really an awesome resource. Yeah.
Thank you.
And you can post links that the people can click on. That is.
Yeah, it seems I'm the only one who can do this. I'm not sure what's going on with this streaming tool. Okay, we should file a bug report or improvement request. I mean, not sure how much do they test with accessibility and things, but yeah, I would assume, yeah, quite a lot. There's so many things in my head. We could talk for hours maybe, but one thing maybe I want to get rid of is like Hidde, like you mentioned in the beginning of your lightning talk, that you would love to have the browsers fix accessibility issues or automatically, or more automatically, or more smart, or right. So what was the thing? When like I think that the thing is the balance between like how does a browser force or override or overrule something what a developer did, because maybe with the help of AI, I don't know, it detected something is not ideal yet and just fixes it, versus giving full control to the developers. Right? I think this is the big challenge here. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's about who to prioritize, right? Authors specify what they want the website to look like, and browsers have some impact. They can decide what a website looks like. But what about the user, right? Maybe the user should actually get that control and say, well, focus, I need that to look like this because then I can see it everywhere, please. And that should be an option, I think, because yeah, of course, authors want to control, they want to have full control, and web designers want to know what the thing that they're designing is going to look like. They want to be sure. But they've never really been sure, right? I mean, websites have always looked different in different places, and it's kind of a feature of the web. And they kind of lost their chance by not providing a good focus indicator, right? Or by doing outline none or on some nonsense like that. So, I think, yes, sorry for the people who want to design their website themselves, but if you make it inaccessible, at least there should be features available to users to try and override.
Yeah.
It's a bit like
Some
reader
intervention
mode.
is needed. Yeah.
You can turn on reader mode as well and see the website in a completely different layout so that it's more easy to read.
Let's take a look at the chat. Yeah, Maurice, you just wrote it also in the chat. The best voices you heard were the ones included in MS Edge read aloud feature, almost like audiobook quality. Oh, sounds good.
Yeah, as far as I can say it, I haven't heard that many voices, but these are really good. Also the German ones.
Okay.
Can I ask a question to Leonie regarding that? Do you listen to audiobooks with an e-reader voice or to the audiobook recorded voice? And do you have a preference in that?
So reading for pleasure, not work related or educationally related, I almost always prefer to listen to an actor read it. But most of the reading I do for work, for learning, I either do on my laptop, so I'm using my screen readers voices, or I'll use the Kindle app or something like that has synthetic speech. But for reading for pleasure, I still don't find synthetic speech good enough. I find a lot of the book gets lost in conversion rather than translation.
Right.
And it's getting better. It's the quality of the speech is amazing now that you can get, even from the reasonably widely available text-to-speech engines from Google, Microsoft, and people like that. I've been playing around with one from play.ht, and the quality is absolutely fantastic. But what we still haven't got right is the delivery, and that's why things like CSS Speech, SSML are so important, because they let us, as I said earlier, put in the pauses, change the weight, change the emphasis, and do all the things that humans do naturally when we're speaking to each other or reading out loud to each other. And so for reading for fiction and pleasure, that's the bit that's missing in synthetic speech for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm reading this audiobook now where it's like a bunch of different British accents. So there's someone from London and someone from where are they from the north somewhere, and the actor does the accents. That would probably be hard to do with a synthetic voice.
It certainly would if you used the same one. I mean, I suppose the advantage is that if you sort of scripted it well and had the time and patience and money to do it, you could use entirely different synthetic voices, but you would have to mark up the text in some way, which would be a very lengthy and expensive thing to do. And so you're right, a human can actually switch accents, and usually with a book narrator, of course, it's one person, and then they will do their best to, if they're a male sounding voice, they will try and represent female or non-binary characters in vocal styles that seem more appropriate, and do all the things, of course, that actors do pretty routinely. But
I think we need a web standard for that. So because the voices are already there. If you use an iPhone or a Mac, there are lots of voices, lots of different English accents. So you can use a voice which is like an Indian English accent, and lots more. So there's already something there. We just need a web standard to support it.
I think even Microsoft Windows has also certain voices there. Not sure if the variety is as high, but I remember there were quite a few voices there. I mean, Microsoft Bob, it was very robotic, but over time they also worked on this. The thing that just popped into my mind to come back to this AI thing, maybe doing this annotation work at that part, basically, when the AI can read a little bit more of the context, which person is speaking, this could be kind of automated. That could be a hope where AI could maybe help us so that it's not that much manual labor anymore. Because Leonie, when you were talking about this, I was just thinking about Terry Pratchett Discworld with Mr. Tea Team. How do you want to train this to a synthetic voice to basically not pronounce this in the English way?
Right. And you know, as every screen reader user will tell you, some stuff just gets pronounced so badly. I mean, we're used to it. We don't even really hear it anymore. You just sort of learn to ignore it. But yeah, synthetic speech and pronunciation is a whole other problem that needs to be solved. Yeah, and I've just sent you a DM on Mastodon because I've fallen off the Discord as well. It's a link to a site, again, put together with help from Stuart Langridge, where we're getting people to submit the voices that they have available in their particular browser and platform, because we're trying to understand all the different variations on a theme. If you're able to share that,
yes,
it's
just
turning
share
into
it.
quite an interesting resource. And yeah, if there are any particularly regional variations, and I'm guessing with this audience here, if we've got people from different countries, you know, if you've got different primary languages on your devices, it would be interesting to get your data into this as well, if you'd mind sharing that.
Yeah, I did.
Thank you.
Cool. I think we kind of need to come to an end. I think I feel we could talk way longer, but maybe we could do a follow-up. At least the whole topic deserves it, in my opinion, way more. Yeah. Any maybe last question from my side? What to you, Hidde and Leonie? What do you see as still the biggest challenges and make the web more accessible for all? It's a big question. Sorry.
It is. If I had to choose one thing, I would probably say keyboard accessibility, because it affects so many people. You know, when something works with the keyboard, it's likely to work well with a screen reader, with speech recognition, with so many other technologies, quite possibly better on touchscreen devices as well. And yet so often and I am going to come back to the quality of the things that JavaScript frameworks spit out, but you know, the old span pretending to be a link, and it has the click behavior but no keyboard behavior, and it can't be focused on. Too much of that still exists, and if we could fix that, we'd make life a lot easier for an awful lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that is one of the main things. Maybe mine would be to zoom out a bit more, better guidance, so better information for developers. Tell them in more clear language and more precisely what sort of things they need to do to make the web accessible, so that they can go do it. I have a blog post about this, by the way.
Yes, it's good. Everybody should read it if you haven't already.
Yeah.
So bad plugging my thing, but yeah, it's true.
No, brilliant post here.
You blog awesome stuff. That's
Yeah.
totally worth it. Yeah. We'll share a lot of things in the comments under the video, which might get lost otherwise. Yeah, so you can click all the links and from there continue. There's so much things there. Anything from your side, Moritz, like closing final words?
Build websites for humans. I stole that from Manuel Matuzovic, who said that in my podcast, but that's basically it. Yeah, build a website for humans.
Yeah. And by the way, I can totally recommend your Frontend podcast. I love it. We'll also share the link to this.
Thanks a lot.
It's always like, also like, sadly, Manuel could not join. I asked him before, but he had maybe some German train issues, delays. But yeah, he also writes awesome stuff on this topic. Maybe we can get him for some upcoming meetup as well. Yeah. So don't want to stretch too much of your time. Really, thank you so much, Leonie. And
Thank you for having me.
It was really great that you joined our small meetup group. And yeah, the topic deserves it, in my opinion. Like Moritz said, the web needs to become more human again, so to say.
Yeah.
This with our help, right? We are the ones who can make it possible. Okay, then I would say to the audience, thanks for staying so long with us. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't stop yourself with questions, comments, and yeah, getting into the topic again, or starting there, or digging deeper, especially inspired by the today's topics around CSS Speech and CMS Accessibility. Yeah, thank you, and yeah, have a good rest of the day. And we speakers maybe can gather together for 1 minute in the tool, but for the audience, thanks, and see you for the next meetup. Date is to be scheduled. Stay tuned. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.